Hello and welcome to the Gratitude and Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Sara Mitich. I am an actor, a yoga instructor, a former ballet dancer, but above all, I am a wildly curious person. So I've spent the past several years researching and studying human behavior, why we do what we do, who and what we innately are, what my purpose is on this planet. And I'm here to share the insights and the tools that curiosity has led me to uncover, in hopes of helping you to navigate the inevitable ups and downs of your own life, and in hopes of inspiring you to become the person that you have always wanted to be. So pull up a chair or go for a walk, hop on that treadmill or go for a drive, and join me as I explore what it is to be a human being in this lifetime. Hello, and welcome back to another episode. So almost exactly 2 years ago, I spent 11 days at a silent retreat in Bali. It was called the Bali Silent Retreat. And I've talked about it a couple times, but it is something that I really wanted to dive into today and talk about the importance of silence and what it taught me. And more than that, I was actually able to get in contact with one of the co-founders of the retreat, Patricia, via WhatsApp. And I was able to ask her some questions and get some answers. So I'm going to lace in her answers to some of my questions about silence and the importance of silence, what it offers us, removing distractions, all that good stuff. So I'm going to put in each of her responses, and then I'm going to talk about my own experience and the truth that I find in her responses, in what it was like for me at the actual retreat and what I've taken from that retreat to this day, and I continue to take in my life. So before I get into that part of the episode, I want to get into some specifics about this retreat. So it was a silent retreat, so there was no speaking. There was no devices or technology. You could keep your devices in your room if you wanted, or you could lock them up in a locker. That's what I did. You can read, you can write, you can journal, you can walk. There's yoga and meditation classes. So this retreat wasn't a Vipassana, which is a more strict 10-day silent practice, let's call it. This is a retreat for meditation and prayer. So it was a little less rigid in that perspective, but the silence part of it was definitely, I have a podcast. I like to talk. Me being silent for 11 days was incredible. It really was. It also made me appreciate how much I do like to talk and having the ability to talk, which I will get into. So my prep for this retreat, just to give you an idea of where I was at. So I went in August of 2022. At this retreat, there's no coffee, there's no alcohol. It's all vegan food that's grown on the land, which was incredible. Honestly, it was the best food I've ever eaten at any resort, hotel, anything like that. And they had duck eggs, like fresh duck eggs. That was the only thing they had that wasn't vegan. Oh my gosh, they had the best fresh baked bread every day. That's a whole other thing. I love bread. It is my favorite food. So at this point in my journey, so for those of you who have been with me on the podcast from the beginning, you know my summer of sadness. So this happened a year after my summer of sadness. I was really into the work on myself. That June, at the end of that June or mid-June, I got hit with like really bad food poisoning, and I couldn't eat meat after that. And I didn't drink alcohol for quite a few months. This was my time of no drinking alcohol. And the reason I went to this retreat is I had been thinking about going to a silent retreat. Intuitively, that little voice inside was saying, hey, I want to go to a silent retreat. I always thought it would be Costa Rica for some reason. And then I was filming a movie. And in meditation one morning, I got 2 downloads. One was, you need to take 4 months off work. No auditions, no nothing. And you need to go to Bali and go live in silence. And I was like, okay. I've made a vow to always listen to that little voice inside. Because that little voice, that it goes beyond intuition for me. Like, that is my connection to the higher up, okay? Universe, source, God, creator, sub in whatever works for you. But that little voice to me when I actually allow myself to listen to it, it never lets me down, ever. And for the record, I didn't listen to it. For so many years, I didn't listen to it on so many things. And now I've just made a vow that I will always listen to it. And so I got out of meditation that day. I was like week 2 of 5 filming this movie. I, of course, finished the movie. But I messaged my agents and I said, hey, I need to take some time off. And I'd never done that before. In 10 years, I had never taken time off auditioning, time off potential gigs, time off the industry at all. And so this was a big thing for me, but they're incredible. And so they completely supported me. And I sat at my computer and I Googled Silent Retreat Bali. And then one of the first ones that popped up, I clicked on and I picked 11 days and it happened to be 50% off. So I was like, okay, this is a universal sign. This is how I know intuition's right. I clicked on it. I booked it. It was done. I hadn't planned anything else about my trip, but that part of it was done. And so that was in April, okay? Just to give you a timeline, that was in April of that year. End of June, I got the food poisoning. And so all of July, I knew I was going to this retreat, and I was already in a phase of solitude in the work I was doing on myself. I took time off work. I'd kind of pulled away from friends and family, and there was a lot of things going on inside of me. There was a lot of recalibration around who I was and who I wanted to be. And I was really starting to step into who I wanted to be. But I was still in my really solitary phase of doing this inner work on myself. And so after the food poisoning, I didn't have coffee either. So heads up, if I love coffee, I'm just going to say that I love coffee so much. My morning coffee is my favorite thing. And I know that if I didn't have coffee, I'd probably get the withdrawal headaches. I don't have an overwhelmingly amount of coffee every day anymore, but I do have a couple cups. And so my body is, I understand, addicted to it to a point. So my plan was before the retreat to take 2 weeks off coffee so that I wouldn't be going through those withdrawals at the actual retreat, because I knew that the retreat itself would be a challenge for me. So I was trying to lessen the obstacles. So that's where I was at going into this retreat. Already kind of in my solitary thing, not eating meat, not drinking alcohol, not drinking coffee, and getting ready to go to Bali, which I'd never traveled to that part of the world either. That was a journey in itself. So that's a bit of background on where I was at, mind, body, soul, before I got there. And so the first question I asked Patricia was, what does spending time in silence offer us? And this was her answer.
What does spending time in silence offer us and allow us to do? Well, Sara, for starters, it's fascinating if we take a look at it that silent, the word silent and listen, have the same letters. What I see happening is when we're silent, it's easier to listen.
So this was probably one of the biggest experiences that I had, was actually learning to listen. Listen to myself, listen to my inner talk, listen to nature. There's a difference between silence and quiet, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but living in silence for 11 days allows you honestly to indulge in your sense of hearing in every way. Also, I used to talk so much. I still do at times. Like I said, I love talking. It was interesting for me to see how much or how little I listen. And this used to be a really big thing for me. So most of the time I'd operate from a place of needing to prove myself. And so I would interject in conversations and I'd cut people off, and it all came from a loving place, but it was a default for me. Interrupt here, show them I relate to them there, just jump in all the time. Being silent for 11 days helped me listen so much. And on top of that, I was able to listen to my body. I realized how tired I was. I slept a lot at the retreat, not from boredom, but from an actual need. It was so refreshing to just let my body sleep and wake up whenever it pleased. And again, no caffeine here to keep me up when I felt tired. It completely recalibrated my system. And it's truly, in silence is when you truly rest. I had another episode recently, self-care and rest, right? And they're two different things. Watching a movie that you love, going out with friends, all of this is self-care. That's great, but it's not rest. True, actual rest for me is silence and stillness. The ability to remove distractions, to remove all the noise of the outside world. And so I asked her about removing distractions, about what that does for us. And this is what she said.
Oh, yes, removing distractions. As technology expands, I seem to be more easily distracted and have a much shorter attention span. So, by reducing distractions, phone, people, media, music, responsibilities, etc., a calmness and a joy arises.
Noise is exhausting. Your mind is always running, even when there's background noise going on, right? Removing all these distractions. Nowadays, honestly, like I just said, detox from coffee before you go do something like this. I would try to detox a little bit from the distractions because I think it takes a day or two to detox just from that before you get to the deeper part of what silence can offer you. You have to allow yourself to detox from the wired instinct to just pick up your phone and check your email or hit the social media button. I don't know about you, but sometimes I find myself opening my phone and hitting my email just as a default physical mannerism. There's a big detox that happens from physical and mental noise of the external world when you live in silence, when you take away all the buzzes and the people and the media and everything that exists outside of you. Because for me, silence is a beautiful avenue of meeting yourself. And I wanted her to chime in on this as well.
Silence can definitely be an avenue to meeting ourselves for sure. My observation for over a decade of guests in silence is they acquaint themselves, they actually reacquaint themselves with themselves. And so when we are engaged with living in silence, such as eating, reading, sleeping, exploring nature, and we're doing this for extended days, authenticity can reorganize our priorities and our perspectives. It's fascinating to watch ourselves shift, actually.
This was the biggest thing for me in these 11 days of silence is it made me really meet myself. So I'd met myself again, summer of sadness, big shrooms trip, came to meet myself and all of my demons. And so I was already into the work on meeting myself, but you really get to know you, the real you, in silence with no distractions. And it does show you what your priorities have been and your perspective. So you get to know the fearful and loving thoughts that are going on inside your head. You get to come face first with the emotions that maybe you've been suppressing. You reevaluate your connection to others, to the world, to life around you. Silence is an incredible time for reflection. You hold up that mirror to yourself, and it shows you your relationship to yourself and everything around you. And when it comes to the emotions, silence lets you sit in them. So, look, for me, the retreat, the first 3 days were heaven. Honestly, I was like, I could be here every single day. I could live here and I'd be so happy. I just have that part of me, right? Not everybody has it, and I get it. But there is a part of me that would love to go live in the mountains with nothing and no one around me and just like be in this communion with all that is, as I call it. Be in communion with myself, with source, God, universe, spirit, energy. Again, sub in whatever word works for you. But I could live that life. There's a part of me that yearns for it. So for the first 3 days, I was like, this is heaven. The middle 5 days were 10 years of therapy in 5 days for me, because suddenly all these other demons I had started coming out, or in the work that I was doing on myself, I realized I was swinging to extremes in certain ways. I realized, honestly, this is the thing about silence. You learn if you are your own best friend. And I realized that I wasn't. I still wasn't. I still wasn't experiencing authentic self-love. I was more my foe than my friend. My inner critic went crazy. I started comparing myself to other people at the retreat. I started comparing my physical body to other women at the retreat. I started comparing how clear my skin was. And then I started breaking out, which for me happened to be a trigger. And so my inner critic, those 5 days, I got real honest with myself and really met myself for who I was there. There was a part of me that was like, why did I need to go across the world and sit in silence for 11 days? Like, what is motivating that? Is that ego, or is that actual, intuition? Intuition didn't tell me to do 11 days. Fun fact, I was speaking with this woman and I was speaking with a few other people, and apparently the average to go is like 3 days, 2 nights, 3 days, or something like that. I went for 11 nights. So I learned for myself, like the mirror I was holding up, I learned the difference between mental discipline and punishment, which was a really important thing for me to learn. Silence allows you, honestly, to ask yourself if you're being authentic. What are your motivations for the things that you're doing? Are they coming from your own authenticity, or are they coming from somewhere outside of you? Are they coming from your ego? Are they coming from expectations of others? This is why I think silence is such an incredible avenue to meeting yourself. You can't meet yourself like this in the noise of the world. Silence is such a great tool. It's such a great tool in everyday life, and it's such a great tool in challenging times. This is what Patricia had to say about that.
Silence is a tool. Yes, yes. We need tools. We need tools in order to transition or cope or sometimes just get through a difficult conversation. Taking a pause in silence can help us prioritize and remember what might be important.
What I love about looking at silence as a tool is there's a couple things here, right? First off, I have so many tools. I have this like little tool belt of everything, mind, body, soul tools that can help me in challenging times. And the simplicity of using silence as a tool can be so forgotten about or overlooked. To just pause, to pause in a challenging moment, to just even pause and give yourself silence when you're going through an overwhelming time, even at work, if your work is at an office or you're working from home and things are overwhelming you. And I want to say here, you can almost use silence as two different tools. Like there's a difference between silences. There's a difference between no devices, no media, right? Like just unplugging that silence. For me, there's silencing the outside noise. And then there's the silence of no speaking. Both are tools. When and how do you want to speak? My instincts were very interesting to observe at the silent retreat. There was this one time in the kitchen where, because I'm there with, I think on the busiest day on the weekend, there's 20 of us, and that's the max capacity of this retreat. And so in the kitchen, somebody had dropped something. And my instinct was to speak and to go help them pick it up. And I still did help them pick it up, but the communication changes, right? And so that silence of no speaking, I think, is such an incredible tool because it shows you when do you want to speak and how do you want to speak. And again, for me, somebody who had verbal diarrhea for a lot of her life, as I call it. It's just like I would get nervous and I would talk, and silence was such a foreign concept to me for so long. And it wasn't until I really dove into meditation that I even understood what stillness and silence was and could be. So I've learned to pause now and be silent in my everyday life. In moments where my reactivity pops in, and I'll be honest and say I'm not perfect at this, there are times where I'm still reactive, but silence, the tool of silence, has taught me that, ooh, okay, something is happening inside of me right now. I'm going to pause and sit in silence for a moment before I respond to this. I also start most of my days in silence now. I've done that for a while, but after this retreat, it amplified that for me. Because in silence, I'm able to reflect, I'm able to observe myself, my own behaviors, as well as the world around me. So in the mornings, I sit, I journal, and I just sit in my backyard in silence and observe all the nature around me. And nature is a really big part of this retreat as well. And it's a really big part of my life, and I truly believe it should be a big part of everyone's life because of the effect it has on us. And Patricia had a really wonderful insight about what being in nature does for us and what it offers us.
Being submersed in nature is a very interesting and very popular topic now. Undergrowth, overgrowth, communication between different aspects of nature, fascinating science. My perspective is that as a human, being in silence in the midst of nature is such that the vibration of nature has a profound effect upon us. However, nature is not quiet. Nature is not silent. There are birds, insects. Here there are chickens, dogs. There's the wind and the rain and the movement of leaves and trees. Nature has this gentle way, but very firm way of attending to our authenticity. And when we are embracing authenticity, our truth is close by, and we can say hello. We can say hello to all our wonderfulness and anger and fears and hopes and dreams with fewer social stories of shoulds and woulds and coulds, etc. It's amazing.
This resonated so much to me because when I am silent, and especially be in nature, I feel the most present. And presence is where it's at. And I feel grateful. And I feel here. I feel like I'm living in the moment, and I'm not bogged down by all the stories of my past, and I'm not bogged down by everybody's expectations of me for the future or my own expectations. I'm just here now. Nature has an incredible ability to teach us so much. I have learned so much of myself, of humanity, of others, of human beings by studying nature. And the science is out. How nature is good for our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health. The science is finally catching up, but it's not just the science of it, okay? Trust your own experience of it. How do you feel when you're sitting in silence out in the woods? There's a reason that feels so comforting. There's a reason that feels so true to you because that is part of you. So there's a couple stories about nature I want to share here from my time at the Silent Retreat. Part of the Silent Retreat, there's a jungle, and I had never been in a real jungle before. And I went through the jungle, and there was a bench at the end of it, and you could look out onto the river. Side note, this jungle had butterflies so big I thought they were birds. It was wild. I had never experienced something like that before. But I was sitting on this bench, and I was just observing, and I was present. And the river had a very strong current. And there was this big leaf, and it fell off a tree, and it got into the river, and it got stuck in the current. And so it would flow in the current, and then it would get caught up in a rock, and it would get beat up by the current, by the waves. Then it would get loose and keep going. And then it would get caught on a twig and it would get ripped a little bit. And then it would fall off the twig and keep going. And then it got stuck like under a rock for a very long time. But eventually it somehow shifted, whether it shifted or the rock shifted, and then it continued to flow. And I realized that's life. That is life. You will have moments that stop you, that weigh you down, but you keep going, and you will keep going if you allow yourself to. There's so many moments like that. If you just sit out in the woods or you just sit somewhere out in nature and you just watch, you watch the life around you, you watch how the animals act, how they work together, how they hunt each other. You just watch life unfold in front of you. The other thing I really learned was I learned that grace and power can exist at the same time. And how I learned this was, it was a full moon when I was there. And I woke up one day at like 3:30 and the full moon was like outside my little cabin. And I was sitting on my front porch and there was this beautiful big full moon. And it was so stunning. And it was so graceful and beautiful. And all underneath it was wild lightning. Like the clouds were underneath it, so it wasn't touching the moon at all. And I'm glad I didn't have my phone to take this picture because it's imprinted behind my eyes for the rest of my life. But I do wish moments like this that I could draw or paint or something, because I'll never forget it. But it taught me in that moment, just by watching this lightning and watching the moon so full and so gentle. And I was like, okay, I can be graceful and powerful at the same time. I can be gentle and have strength at the same time. These things can coexist together. And that's what I mean. I learn a lot about the things about myself and the things about life by observing nature. And it's in these moments that I feel the most connected to this greater energy, to divine intelligence, to oneness, to creator, whatever you want to call it. And Patricia actually reflected this back to me as well.
Regarding our connection with divine source or oneness or God, whatever we want to call that energy, which is so very, very, very wonderful to feel, yet not so easy to describe. Well, this feeling or knowingness is essential to our spiritual and our energetic evolution.
I feel this so fully, and I felt this so fully. I felt so connected to all there was. I'll dive in just shortly, but I had a big ego death. That was like those 5 days that were so crazy for me in the middle. There was like a massive ego death there. But even in that, I felt such connectedness. I felt that oneness everywhere that I went. In the jungle, in the labyrinth, at the main house for food. Everyone there, we all were there for the same reason. And I just felt so connected to everything and everyone living in that silence. It's why meditation for me still is important. It's why I start every single day in silence, is again, that connection to something greater than me, because in that connection is ease. And I think the reason why it's essential for our spiritual and energetic evolution is because you realize that there is more to this life than just you. And yet you are connected to all that is life. And that is also the beauty of silence. That is the beauty of when you shut it all down, including your inner thoughts, and you're able to connect to your spirit. I say this a lot. You are not your thoughts. You are not your mind. You are not even your physical body. You are the one underneath it all. And when you are silent, especially for a concentrated, intentional amount of time, it's a lot easier to access that part of you. And it's the hardest thing for me to find words for. I don't have words for this feeling, but it feels like home, and it feels awesome, and it feels safe, and it feels peaceful. And it's where most of my authentic creativity comes from. It's where most of my creative downloads come from. It's that feeling, it's that thing that is that little voice inside that when I get quiet talks to me. Okay, so I'm going to dive into my ego death, but first I actually want to share this recording because I asked her where this idea came from for this retreat, and this was her answer.
A long, long time ago, when receiving the call, this was the third call of my life, and it was to build a silent retreat for prayer and meditation. It was very specific. So at one point in time, I'd been sitting in meditation for quite a while, and I finally asked, so why the silent part? The answer was easy. When people stop talking, the ego goes down. And when the ego goes down, it's easier for the spirit to join in. Now that was spot on. I understood that.
So yeah, the ego really does go down, right? Because it has less external things to feed off of. But I'm going to be honest here and say my ego definitely went down after it got really, really, really loud first. Like I said, the first 3 days were bliss. The middle 5 days were way more difficult for me. I said this earlier, but my need to compare really came out. And comparison is ego, right? Because we are all one. We're all the same energy. So every single time we compare, we make somebody else not one with us. So if you find yourself comparing yourself to somebody else, that is a direct reflection of something that you need to look at and sit with in yourself. I also realized while my ego is getting really, really loud, I realized I had swung so much in what I called the inner work. And honestly, I'd gained a spiritual ego. That's where I was at. I was suddenly thinking that I knew more than other people, and this is why I needed to shut everybody out, because I knew more than other people, and if they didn't want to do the work, I gained this. I'm not better than them, but I know more, and that makes me better in a way. And so I realized that I'd gained this spiritual ego, and I really needed to balance myself out. And I was as my ego was getting louder and louder, this is what it felt like. I was so overwhelmed by my thoughts. My thoughts, I'll never forget this. And thankfully I had my journal. I journal a lot. I journaled out these entire 11 days, like all day, every day. I had thoughts of everything I was doing, everything I wasn't doing, thoughts of why I wasn't who I wanted to be still, even a year later of doing the work. And this was my biggest breakthrough here, was learning the difference between mental discipline and punishment in the inner work. And it became evident to me that sometimes I'd be pushing myself into the punishment aspect, claiming it to be mental discipline, that I'd push myself and I would do these extremes for egoic reasons. And it forced me to balance myself out. I also, like I said, at this point, I was a pretty solitary creature to an extreme. And it made me realize I wanted relationships. Even if the people didn't fully understand me, even if they weren't living from the same place that I was, I wanted them. I learned that there was a balance to be found here. And it was my ego that was pushing me into this place of spiral, of spiritual spiral, of personal development spiral, of mind, body, soul spiral, whatever term resonates with you, okay? But I learned that a balance had to be made. And honestly, my biggest moment, my biggest clarity, and it's one reason why this podcast is called Gratitude and Growth, is because in all of it, as I was spiraling, I was like, okay, personal development books say mindset. So right now my mindset is negative, and enlightenment stuff says whatever it says. I can't think of it right now, but all these different things that I'd studied, all this different terminology, all these different modalities, everything. My brain was jumping from thought to thought to thought. I thought it was going to explode, being like, hey, I'm sad and I'm unhappy right now, and I'm breaking down, and having a mental breakdown at this silent retreat in Bali. And I don't know which part of this I'm supposed to hold on to get me out of this downward spiral. And this is what I journaled out. And this is what I come back to. Be grateful, be humble, be kind, and live. Be grateful, be humble, be kind, and live. So now when I'm spiraling, I come back to these 4 things. When I'm wondering, hey, am I living my life how I want to be living it? I come back to these things. Gratitude for me is everything. Gratitude for me is what silence can be rooted in. Gratitude for me is presence. When I am presently silent now, I feel my gratitude through every cell in my body. My gratitude for life. My gratitude for everything that's around me. And when the work gets to be too much, when I'm confused on what mindset method or spiritual modality or physical somatic healing modality I'm supposed to be using, I just come back to be grateful. First and foremost, be grateful. That is my key to everything. Be humble. Keep my ego in check. Be kind. Let every choice I make be rooted in love. And live. Live this life. Even the spiritual and personal development world can make you live from a place of rules. You can build your own cage of doing the work on yourself and not actually live your life. Mental discipline, yes. Moderation, yes. But live. Above all, live. So that was the biggest thing that the silence offered me. And I will forever be grateful for this experience. And for the record, I continue to go through phases of silence. In a couple weeks, actually, I'm going to head out and go live in silence for 2 nights, 3 days. A little less than the 11-day thing. But I really took time to think about how to actually bring everything I had learned in these 11 days of silence back into my busy day-to-day living. And I actually asked Patricia this same question, and this was her response to it.
How can people hold on to what they've discovered in silence when they return to the reality of their busy day-to-day life? That was a big question. And it was one of the main intentions of the experience that people could take away at least a taste of whatever transformation that they had personally experienced, that they could take it, keep it, or give it to others. Plant a seed of the feeling wherever they would go. Our hope is that the world would be changed with tiny little bits of feeling. Tiny bits of feeling of something true, authentic, real. Very, very special.
And I think she says it in such a beautiful way that people can take it, they can keep it, or give it to others. That they can plant a seed of the transformation, the feeling that they had experienced. And it is very transformational. That is the biggest thing. Silence can be so transformational. And it's so simple. And yet it is sometimes forgotten or overlooked or not realized to be such a beautiful tool. I now regularly spend time in silence. Like I said, I need it. It recalibrates me. It realigns me. It gives me clarity. But it also just gives me so much peace and joy and bliss and presence for all the reasons I've already talked about. I unplug as often as I can, but I do live in a world where being plugged in is a way of life. And I choose to take part in that world. Silence allows you to appreciate the beauty of life. That's another big takeaway for me. Silence in nature, especially. Silence lets me draw my energy back to me, and see what's important, not just spiritually, but on a day-to-day. What's important for me to do, to be, and to get done today. Silence adds to my productivity, honestly. Sometimes I notice my brain being fried if I'm really in a creative tunnel, and I'll just step outside, device-free, silent for like 15, 20 minutes, and just let my mind decompress, and then get hit with my next wave of inspiration or whatever it is. Because silence gives your brain a break. It allows you to just shut it down for a bit. Think about it. Your brain, if it's always go, 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 when does it get to rest, right? Silence refuels me. And silence sparks and nurtures my creativity. It's in silence that I usually come up with my best ideas. Some of the greatest minds that I've studied and researched say the same thing. You need to shut it down to allow new things to come in. So that's my experience with silence. And that's how I continue to intentionally implement silence in my life. It's become more than just a habit. It's an integral part of my day-to-day living, is spending some time in silence. And look, sometimes when I'm away with a group of friends, I get less silence, but I do actually carve out time to just go, even if it's 15, 20 minutes, and just be alone and be in silence to recalibrate. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. And that's what I want you to reflect on and ponder on, is silence. And if you've been called to go to a silent retreat, I highly recommend it. Again, these are all my experiences, right? So please take everything through the lens of my experience. Not everybody has the same experience, to each their own. You will always experience what you desire and what you need to experience. Or what you desire or what you need. Sometimes the things we desire are not necessarily the things that we need. That part's not always up to us. But silence is an incredible thing that we are blessed to experience. And so, if anything, I hope to inspire you to go spend time in silence in some capacity. Whether it's in a retreat format like this, or just carving out pockets of silence in your day-to-day life and connecting with that part of you. So that's today's episode. I will finish it off with some gratitude and some growth. I'm very grateful for putting this episode together and reliving those 11 days. Like I said, I have journals too of my time there. And this is why I love journaling, because you get to reflect back, right? Not only and witness your growth, but also just relive certain moments. And so I'm so grateful for recording this episode and listening to this incredible woman's insights and just reliving my time and my lessons learned. So I'm grateful for this episode. And my growth lately is I'm going through this really incredible time of creativity and inspiration and spark. And I see so many things ahead of me. And so my growth right now is always reminding myself that there's no rush, that I will create certain things and the timing of them doesn't necessarily matter. But focusing on one thing at a time, instead of allowing this beautiful list of inspiration to overwhelm me, to know and trust that every step that I work on, step by step, will lead to everything I desire to create, to be created. So that's my growth lately. It's been a wonderful whirlwind of all the good things. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in today. As always, stay grateful and keep growing. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked what you heard, hit that subscribe button and maybe send it to someone who you think might need to hear today's message. And let me know how everything's sitting. Leave me a rating and a review and let me know what's resonating with you. What do you want to hear more of? What's your favorite episode and why? And I hope you find your way back here to another episode, another time, as we keep exploring this beautiful and wild thing that we all call life.